like to move on to this process of developing an advocacy agenda itself. So before we go out in the public or talk to the parliamentarians, we need to, of course, find out that and determine sort of what is our policy agenda and how do we develop the advocacy agenda itself. So some of the questions which we have addressed, I'm not going to belabor them again, but some of the helpful questions are asking ourselves who is your target audience. And when we say target audience, it doesn't suffice to say that government is the target audience, because each policy, let's say we again coming back to the of land management, this will be relevant to very specific ministry or government department, and within that will be very specific to certain officials, not everyone. And so therefore it is important to identify the precise target audience, and then to determine first of all what is already the level of buy-in in that audience for the policy position you are going to take. Is the policy environment transparent? Many countries do not have freedom to information legislation. So Malaysia still does not have freedom to information, and that restrains many of the discussions when we talk about the legal and the legislative and policy campaigns. But I was wondering, by the way, which countries have freedom to information access in legislation? Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia has freedom to information access.
Yes, we are.
And Cambodia and Vietnam.
PNG has it in the Constitution, and in the Constitution it requires that its specific law is prepared, specifies. That law is still pending, but the current government and the
Also been 45 years.
Deputy Prime Minister is committed to doing it, and it's something that we have in our current National Action Plan for the Open Government Partnership at this minute. And TI-PNG is meant to be chairing that component on civil society together with the government component. So that's a case of partnerships, so it's meant to be partnership.
Yeah.
But Malaysia doesn't have the right to information law.
No. It's on the agenda of the new government. Faiz, you have been sitting silent. Anything on the freedom of access?
So basically, the Ministry of Communication has set up a meeting also to discuss on the potential and also the possibility of initiating this discussion on freedom of expression and freedom of information act, which I think will be tabled next year, I think. But in terms of the moving forward, or maybe the agenda to move forward, it has not been disclosed by the government yet. Yeah. So, but in terms of the discussions among CSOs, especially C4, the Center for Combat Corruption and Terrorism, they have been doing papers and also a public forum to discuss on this the possibilities of doing this act. Yeah.
And I think for the Freedom of Information Act in Malaysia, because I work for C4 for 8 months, specifically for the Freedom of Information Officer. One of the problems in Malaysia, because we have an Officer Secrecy Act, so there will be a conflict between you have the Official Secrecy Act, but at the same time you have the Freedom of Information Act. But there is one practice in India, actually they have both, because we came from same colonizer, right? So like British. So we did in C4 actually, 2017 we did a roundtable discussion co-organized with SOHACAM, National Human Rights Council in Malaysia, which by using their channel, so we had opportunity to invite the government bodies, for instance like PDRM, I mean police, and we had opportunity to invite the home ministry officers and a few others, which Suhakam itself already submitted the resolution to the governments, but it was 2018, even before the government changed. But now, let's see, as you mentioned just now, hopefully UDB had some progress in future. Right, thank you.
So yeah, that kind of policy environment is obviously very challenging when you don't have this basic freedoms available. Then it puts a constraint on how much information you can have before you can actually start with a policy campaign. So the other questions are, okay, what is your level of access to the government, and how can you influence that? Some basic elements of advocacy agenda, I'm just mentioning here because we'll come back to the actual development of a policy advocacy agenda after that. So there are various examples we have discussed about community mobilization, we have discussed about public education, but some of the elements which are important in the advocacy agenda are definition of a particular policy issue and what is the position which a think tank has taken. Then it should be bounded by a time, how much, because normally we are working in specific projects, so how much time we are giving the campaign to. We have talked about the target audience, the government. It also is helpful in becoming a rallying ground for partners and stakeholders. Paul mentioned about the coalition and the international, how different CSOs can be partner on the same agenda. It's also
I recall being here about 9 years ago in KL with a group of open budget related partners, and the freedom of information came up at that stage, and the Malaysian team were really frustrated because they said, we're always one step ahead. We've got problems over governance, but we were always one step ahead of Indonesia. And now Indonesia's overtaken us, they've got freedom of information, this, that, and the other, and we're slipping behind, and that pressure was there. But the Indians gave a rundown, and they just passed their freedom of information legislation, and of course it's incredibly powerful. The legislation has the tier of Supreme Court, and the judges and freedom of information in India are at their tier, and the penalties are very severe. But they did tell our little audience here, but they put one exception, the legislators in India, to their freedom of. You can get all information except not on the qualifications of their members of the legislature. So there was this great hoots of laughter across India. All the members of parliament have got bogus qualifications, and therefore they put in this one exception to the whole rule. A bit, yeah.
But I think the point is that this kind of policy environment and freedom does influence our ability to run advocacy campaigns. And also a good advocacy agenda should not just be based on a sort of rational language, but also should have an appeal, like some emotional appeal. How does it relate to the stakeholders? How can it change if, let's say, a policy we talked about again the land use, the computerization of the land. In many countries, the issue of property rights, the issue of the access to the land registry is still run by manually, and it leads to a lot of corruption. So if the system is changed and if the information is accessible to common people through a central registry, through computer systems, then how can this improve public life how can it improve more, how can it increase more confidence and reduce the costs of the users of the system. So this kind of messages are important for developing the policy advocacy agenda. Next we can talk about the process itself. How do we start? Start, I think, is about more of a random exercise. Now, when we talk about starting or initiation of agenda, it can come from a casual discussion with a minister or with an MP or with even within the organization. Casual brainstorming can identify a specific issue. To give you an example from Pakistan, where I of course come from, and also have worked in think tank for number of years. One of the advocacy campaign in which I was involved was encouraging Pakistani government to sign this WTO's laws information. This is information technology agreement. This is a WTO sort of regime in which the member countries are signatory. This is an optional protocol, and once you agree to it, then you have to abolish all import related duties on the IT equipment. So Pakistan was not part of it. Pakistan is still not part of it. But our advocacy was driven at encouraging the government to sign it. And this all started with a very casual internal discussion. Sometimes this can start from a discussion with a donor, with a partner, that okay, we are interested in investing in a particular, let's say, issue, and if it is consistent with the think tank, then obviously that can be taken up. But the next thing, after you have identified that opportunity of advocacy, you have to define an objective. What is important is that the objective itself, in my experience, there's a sweet spot somewhere between getting too ambitious, means that you are saying, oh, you will remove the corruption in the country. Or I remember there was this campaign or a project which Ideas undertook on corruption issue, that we will, as a result of this project X, we will, or this project will help improving the ranking of the country on the TI index. So Malaysia should be ranked better, or corruption should be reduced. Now, this is a very major undertaking. If you say it as a result of your, this is the advocacy campaign titled, we will improve Malaysia ranking on the Transparency International Index. I think you're asking for too much. And as a, so not as a result of the project or not due to it, but Malaysia situation in corruption deteriorated actually, because there was so many factors out of control for a think tank and cannot be influenced. So it was I would say it was a bad example of setting up an objective of an advocacy campaign. Right? So where the sweet spot between being too insignificant, between picking too insignificant issue, which nobody cares about, and picking up like a very ambitious target, improving Malaysia ranking on anti-corruption. You have to find your own sweet spot, and therefore definition of objective is very important when you are selecting a particular issue. In the earlier slide, I mentioned about what is the level of buy-in in the relevant government or political quarters. So you don't want to start on an issue on which there is like 100% opposition for a successful. This could be a good topic for public education, but this may not be a good topic or good objective for our successful policy advocacy. So what is the sweet spot?
Can I just
Please.
ask you, you've also got the issue that one's a policy think tank, obviously with the objective of undertaking quality research, quality assessments. Sometimes your think tank is actually going to be involved in those assessments. It could be the TI index or some of these other indices. So you're doing that role, but you obviously want to have a good outcome because you're wanting to improve the transparency and accountability as well. So sometimes you've got to balance that role, but you can't undermine the quality. I know that, like with the Open Budget Survey, that when we launch that, and we get attendance, and the Treasurer, Deputy Prime Minister attended, and I'm very disappointed. You could have given us a better score. No, hang on. This is. We're trying to give as good a score as we can, but we've got to do it according to certain criteria. We actually do try to encourage agencies to get this in on time so that you can get a better score, but we can't actually undermine the credibility of what we're doing.
It's a very particular case. I think I agree with you that this is a much more complex case. That when a think tank itself is organization involved in some kind of assessment and advocacy at the same time, I would not like to be in that position. It's a tricky issue. It can also raise questions about conflict of interest and all that. So one needs to be very transparent about it, right? So then we define the objective, and then we, as I said, define the audience, which level of audience we are talking about, and then we determine the strategy. So we by strategy we mean answering the how question, what kind of platform you're using, whether you're going to use the public outreach campaign or you're going to just walk in to the officers or minister's room. We are going to tomorrow I'll share more example or case study on that. But right now we are talking about the advocacy agenda in terms of strategy, and then the way you implement it. What is the timeline? What are the resources which you need to implement that, and how you can ultimately achieve the advocacy agenda. There is also a lot of discussion which we have because a lot of us are involved in research, and I thought I'll just mention a couple of points about the difference between the research and advocacy. So we've already talked about the advocacy. Research is obviously more academic in nature. It's following a question rather than a goal. So advocacy is focusing on a goal. Some advocacy can be research based, but not necessarily. Some advocacy can be just based on you know a problem and you want to solve a problem, or you want to take a position on basis of that. So some differences are important to be kept in mind in that respect. So, for instance, we mentioned about the advocacy, how it starts, and research. So research is mostly a question of inquiry about a problem or a fact finding. Advocacy is again can be based or may not be based. So essentially the differences in the research and advocacy is also research is more evidence led. Advocacy is not necessarily evidence led. Advocacy can be based on the understanding of the coalition partners and the participating organizations in that process. I would say the difference between the research and advocacy is that as a result of a research report, you are hoping to create knowledge, but as a result of an advocacy campaign, you are hoping to create some change. Of course, very good research reports also lead to change, but this may not be always possible. Okay, great. So.